The air in the courtroom was eerily silent, yet so dense with tension, like the air itself had thickened. Every pair of eyes in the room was glued to the front, anticipating in silence a war that had been stewing for years. This wasn't just another routine family dispute being aired on TV. This was the confrontation everybody had anticipated, whispered about, and feared. Meri Brown was about to face Kody Brown in court, and this face-off promised revelations, drama, and an emotional explosion that could shake the Brown family to its core. Meri was the first into the room. The doors swung open, and all eyes turned to her. She walked with measured steps, her posture impeccable, her expression a mask of calm determination. But for those who looked closer, the fire was there behind her eyes, the decades of frustration, silence, and endurance that had led her to this very moment. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about finding her voice back, her dignity, and holding Kody responsible for the decisions that had long affected her life and the people around her. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters, camera crews, family members, and a few supporters had all shown up, anticipating that today's hearing might be the turning point in the Brown story. Flashbulbs flashed as Meri made her way to her seat, with murmurs rifling through the gallery. Some whispered about how bold it was for her to finally confront Kody openly, while others talked about if Kody could withstand her evidence and testimony. Kody, by contrast, seemed placid, or at least he tried to seem placid. He sat in his chair, shoulders squared, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Yet there was a subtle shift in his bearing, apparent to many who watched. A flicker of unease in his eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. For so long, Kody had controlled this narrative, working his will on the dynamics of his family with practiced ease, manipulating what the public saw. But today, the arc had shifted. Today he would be facing one who had prepared for just this moment. A hush completely fell upon everyone as the judge came into the room. With a sharp, commanding bang, the gavel struck, and the court fell silent right away. The cameras focused on the judge, who had an aura about him that demanded attention. "This court is now in session," he stated. "We are here to hear the case of Meri Brown versus Kody Brown." The words just kind of hung in the air, like a charged wire, electric with expectation. Every heartbeat in the room seemed amplified. Family members shifted nervously in their seats. Some exchanged glances that betrayed anxiety and anticipation. The Brown family drama had always been intense, filled with emotional highs and lows, but this courtroom battle carried a weight that reality television could never fully capture. This was real, and the consequences would ripple far beyond these court walls. Meri took a deep breath. She had spent weeks, even months, preparing for this day. Each document, every message, every witness was looked at and critiqued. Her lawyer had briefed her, but deep in her gut, she knew the strengths of her argument would come from her voice, her truth. The nerves or intimidation would not get the best of her. This was her time. She looked briefly over at Kody, not with fear, but calm and piercing resolve. She knew exactly what was to be said. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Spectators leaned forward. Reporters tightened their grips on notepads, and camera crews adjusted their lenses. This was that sort of courtroom moment that would be spoken about for years. That silent anticipation before the storm starts, that dramatic pause which signals the start of a battle, where words could hurt, expose, and ultimately seal a family's fate. and then the clerk called for opening statements. Meri's attorney began in a tempered tone, stating the claims clearly: emotional neglect, fiscal mismanagement, and betrayals of trust inherent in the family dynamic. But it wasn't until Meri herself rose to speak that the weight of what was to unfold was truly felt in the courtroom. Standing tall, her voice steady, Meri addressed the court. "For years, I have endured decisions made without my input. I have been silenced, overlooked, and dismissed in matters that affected not just me, but the entire family. Today, I am here to ensure that my voice is heard, and that the truth is no longer hidden behind appearances." A collective gasp swept through the room. It wasn't even her words, but the undeniable confidence with which she spoke. This wasn't a woman timidly seeking validation. This was a woman in charge of her narrative, armed with facts, evidence, and unwavering courage. Robyn Brown sat among the family, her face a mask of restraint. Tears streamed as she listened, knowing that some of the truths Meri was revealing had been whispered in private conversations for years. But hearing them, so well articulated on the court floor, under oath, with irrefutable evidence to prove it, was almost overwhelming. Each and every one of Meri's points cut deep to the core of what Kody had done and revealed cracks that had always been dismissed or ignored. The judge listened intently, sometimes nodding as Meri spoke. There was unmistakable respect in the way he observed her testimony. In courtrooms, demeanor counts, and Meri's combination of calm authority, articulate speech, and factual precision immediately established her credibility. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat as a flicker of discomfort crossed his features. For years, he had presented himself as the unshakable head of the family, the figure whose decisions were beyond question. Now, as Meri constructed her case, that facade began to crumble. Each word she spoke seemed to put weight on him, exposing vulnerabilities he was not prepared to confront in public. As the session went on, Meri elaborated on specific incidents, decisions where her input was disregarded, financial choices made without consultation, and times of emotional neglect that had quietly undermined her sense of security and respect within the family. She gave proof upon meticulous proof, texts, emails, even witness statements corroborating her experiences. A courtroom hung on every word, thick with tension and anticipation. She'd pause every now and then to let it sink in. The scratching of the judge's pen across notes, reporters' furious scribbling, the gallery exchanging murmurs of shock. Even Kody's legal team looked rattled for a moment, scrambling to adjust strategy in real time. By the end of the first day's session, one thing was clear to all in the room. Meri Brown had come ready, undaunted and firm. The dynamics in this courtroom had changed, and for the first time in a long period, Kody did not appear to know how to react. Whispers of amazement filled the halls outside the courtroom as the court was in recess for a short break. "My God, did you see the way she spoke? I've never seen Kody look so uneasy. This is going to be one for the history books." Inside, the silent Meri permitted herself for a while to think deeply. She knew that this battle was far from over, but it had set the tone for the first session. She had demanded attention, clung to her truth, and given an unambiguous signal that this was her fight, and she was not budging. The courtroom opened again after the short recess, and the tension was palpable. No one doubted that what was about to transpire could mean the end or the beginning of it all for the case resting before them. Into the charged setting stood up Meri Brown, herself exuding calm and authority. In her movements was a quiet power, a confidence born not of ego, but of her conviction and a willingness to share it with the world. She stood before Kody, her gaze fixed on his, unwaveringly. The room was silent, as if the very walls were waiting with bated breath. This was Meri's moment. That moment when she would be able to tell her side of the story without reservation, when she would confront the man who had dictated the terms of their family's story for so long. And when she did so, it was with a deliberateness that left everyone in the room aghast. "Years in this family, I have given myself completely," she began calmly and unswervingly, but with the passion born from every struggle she had fought. "I've sacrificed time, energy, and well-being in order to ensure peace and harmony in the family," she continued. "My voice has been stifled, my views dismissed, and my input denied." The judge leaned forward ever so slightly, indicating he was listening. Even Kody, who had watched so many other people have conflicts, couldn't hide the reaction of nervousness he felt. The calm, composed woman who stood before them had the courtroom mesmerized. Each of her statements was filled with authenticity, so different from the prepared defensive manner he would eventually use himself. Meri began the case with evidence presentation. Her lawyer walked her through documents, texts, and mails that presented a clear case of her claims against Asante. She systematically took the court through the evidence she presented, its meaning crystal clear, with no ambiguity at all. Notice here that this message, sent in March of last year, shows that Kody has unilateral decision-making on the subject of family financial issues, Meri argued, holding up the printing of the message. "I was not consulted. It was not even my opinion that was counted. Yet I was supposed to follow through." Gasps and whispers rose through the gallery. The facts were incontestable, and Meri's calm demeanor made her words strike all the harder. She didn't scream or point fingers. She simply spoke facts, and she had the proof. That made all the difference. She continued, telling of the emotional abandonment and relegation to which she had been subjected over the years. She spoke of times when her thoughts and suggestions had been summarily rejected, of times when family decisions had been made without her participation, of times when her feelings of worry had been invalidated. Each memory was exacting, each reminiscence emotionally invested, but controlled. "I am not here to hurt Kody," Meri said with a determined but not resentful expression in her voice. "I have come to ensure that the truth is acknowledged and to see fairness restored to this situation. For so many years now, I have had to shut down my own voice and diminish my personal values in order to watch as other choices were made which would affect me and my family directly." As she continued talking, Robyn Brown, sitting among the family members, could bear the emotions inside her anymore. Tears flowed freely as she whispered faintly, "This is all that we've known. She's finally saying it." This response of hers reflected what the audience would also feel at that moment, either shock or relief. The judge nodded occasionally, his hand scribbling away at his notebook, clearly amazed at the detail and professionalism of Meri's testimony. So many cases the judge had heard, but a degree of composure and preparation, such as Meri exuded, was unusual. Every time she cited an exhibit, it was not only a mark of preparation, it was a badge of truth, an acknowledgement that she had so thoroughly lived this truth and documented it. Meri did not simply rest on her presentation of evidence. She also spoke about the personal cost she had experienced because of her feelings of being marginalized for so long. She talked about her personal experiences of being undervalued and unheard, emotionally drained from battling her way through this family dynamic controlled by Kody's dominance. "This isn't just about money or decisions related to things in our household," she stated with conviction in her voice that momentarily trembled before being righted quickly. This has everything to do with respect, dignity, and being able to feel like I get to be counted as your partner and get treated as such." Her voice showed conviction as she spoke about what she felt was at stake. The courtroom fell silent, listening to her every word. Even Kody's lawyers were left agape. This was the strategy that Meri had devised, and it was obvious that she had decided to tell the truth and let the evidence speak for itself. Moreover, she had retained control over her narrative and put Kody on the back foot before he even opened his mouth. Then came a particularly telling experience shared by Meri. She talked about a family meeting she had tried to participate in, and she raised her concerns about a significant family decision. She was several times interrupted and waved off with a hand gesture from Kody's waving hand, and was reminded that her thoughts were simply less important than his. She held up a recording of this meeting so that the tone of her words could be experienced. The judge was listening carefully to the tape as it was played. The audience was muttering in shock, their mouths agape. It was one thing to talk of abuse, to describe it in words. It was something else to hear it firsthand, in Kody's own voice, discounting her fears. The evidence was clear, and it had an immediate effect on the courtroom. Meri's account of events had a bigger purpose, one that extended beyond holding Kody accountable for his actions. For Meri's account is one of claiming one's own narrative and rewriting a version of herself that is defined not just in relation to Kody, but in relation to her own desires and sense of self. Meri's narrative is one of resilience, of the strength it has required her to have in order to remain marginalized and yet retain her dignity. "You may look at me as a quiet one, a complacent one, an obedient one," she said, her voice rising with passion. "But I am more than that. I am a strong woman, a capable one, and one who deserves to be respected. And I am not afraid to fight for my rights." The emotions culminated when Meri began speaking to Kody. "For too long, you have made choices that impact all of us, yet you have disregarded my voice. Well, that is about to change. Today is the day the judge hears the reality. And I won't be silenced." Robyn was crying freely now. Her face was buried in her hands. Not a few family members who had been secretly backing Kody were acknowledging Meri's bravery with their glances of surprise and even a certain degree of respect for Meri's stand. It was evident that Meri was rattling the very foundation of their family system that had been under Kody's control all this time. Kody struggled to keep his cool, but subtle telltales of his strain were there. He was flustered, his jaw clenched, and his hands showed a hint of fluttering. For the very first time in a long time, he was face to face with the reality of what his actions had wrought, and it was discomfiting. It was clear that Meri was the winner at the end of the formal session. This was because Meri had presented her issues clearly, confidently, and with genuine emotions. Meri did the impossible by uncovering the truths that could never be ignored, and did so in a manner that impressed the judge and the family that was present. As the court adjourned for the day, the reactions outside echoed with equal fervor to what transpired inside the courtroom. Media analysts wondered at what might transpire as a result of Meri's testimony, with social media lighting up with encouragement for this brave woman's stand, while fans of both the Browns' family members and their patriarch, Brown, were shocked at these turn of events. One thing is certain. Meri's testimony now alters forever this family's case, and their view of Kody Brown forevermore. The room turned dead silent, the attention now firmly fixed on Kody. Having heard Meri's bold and intricately technical testimony, all eyes were on him now. For years, Kody Brown had worked his way through family disputes with ease and poise, often turning a conversation in his direction. But today was different. Today, he was no longer the one controlling the narrative. Today, he faced a woman who had carefully prepared, armed with irrefutable evidence and unshakable resolve. Kody stood from his seat, the air of command slightly depleted. He attempted to look directly into Meri's eyes, but there was a flicker in his that wasn't there before. The courtroom watched with rapt attention as subtle turns took place in this exchange of power. This was no longer the muscular patriarch who had commanded attention since forever. This was a man suddenly on the defensive, a little off-kilter, without an idea of how to refute the strong, precise testimony he had just listened to. He cleared his throat and started, "Your Honor, I always acted in the best interest of my family. My decisions, though misunderstood by some, were made with the intention of protecting and taking care of all concerned." But even as he spoke, it was clear that Kody's words lacked conviction. The pause before each sentence seemed calculated, yet it revealed hesitation rather than confidence. Every word he spoke to justify his previous actions seemed to falter in view of Meri's testimony. The emails, recordings, and witnesses she had presented had painted a pretty vivid picture of decisions made without her consent, and now Kody struggled to give explanations that would hold under scrutiny. Meri's attorney strategically interrupted him to ask Kody to clarify a few things from Meri's testimony. Kody was stumbling and defensive as he answered, sometimes saying 1 minute that he had consulted the family and then immediately contradicting that by stating how Meri's opinions were not taken into consideration. Individually, each slip was minor, but together they began to paint a picture very different from his carefully constructed persona of authority and equanimity. The courtroom could feel the shift. Robyn, seated nearby, dabbed at her eyes, clearly moved by the unfolding drama. She had long witnessed the family dynamics from the inside and knew the tension had been building for years. Now, seeing Kody falter publicly, she felt a mix of emotions, a relief that truth was burbling out, shock at evidence brought forth, and a feeling for how much it would have taken for Meri to bring it all into the open. Kody then tried to divert the conversation, often blaming or downplaying the importance of some incidents. "Some decisions were made in the heat of the moment," he said. "I never intended to hurt anyone. It was never about disregarding Meri. These were just circumstances that required immediate action." But the courtroom was not buying it. Meri had already established that these were not one-off incidents. Records, messages, and recordings all painted a clear picture of constant dismissals of her input. The judge raised an eyebrow to indicate Kody's explanations were not quite serving the purpose of addressing the core issue at hand. Even the jury, if there had been one in this case, would have been leaning toward Meri's side. Things escalated further at one point. Meri's lawyer produced one particularly damning piece of evidence, a recording of a family meeting where Kody had explicitly dismissed Meri's opinion on a critical financial decision. A recording was played in the courtroom, and every word Kody had spoken came across as cold, controlling, and dismissive. The reaction was instant. Mumbles echoed through the gallery as everyone listened with incredulity. Kody's confident poise failed him. His hands clutched on the table as he fought to conceal the effect of hearing his own words so nakedly revealed. He turned to Meri, perhaps for some sign of vacillation or doubt there, too, but there was none. She sat calm, composed, and unflinching. Robyn's reaction was visceral and raw. The tears streamed down her face as she muttered to herself, "I can't believe he said that. She's been right all along." It was as if the emotional weight of years of suppressed feelings, arguments, and family tension manifested in real time. Her breakdown mirrored the emotional journey viewers at home had likely been feeling: shock, validation, and a sense of justice being served. Kody tried to argue that some of the evidence had been misinterpreted, that context mattered, and that his intentions had been pure. Every one of those defenses, however, was systematically torn down by the clarity of Meri's prior testimony. She had anticipated each potential counterpoint, and her arguments had been methodically structured in such a way as to leave no room for doubt. At one point, the judge intervened and kept the hearing on track, but he subtly gave a message to Kody that he should come up with clear and substantive explanations rather than hopeless justifications. "Mr. Brown, I require you to speak directly to the evidence," he instructed. "General statements of intention are unacceptable when confronted with factual documentation and recorded interactions." Kody's frustration began to show. He shifted in his seat, fidgeted with his notes, and let out small sighs from time to time. The confident and commanding figure that most people had seen before started to crumble under the pressure. For the first time, this family, and the world watching, saw some real vulnerability in Kody's demeanor. Things started to reach a fever pitch in the room when Meri introduced testimony from an impartial family consultant who'd stood by and watched as time after time her opinions were dismissed. He testified to specific instances when Meri's input was not taken seriously, her concerns belittled, and her position within the family hierarchy was compromised. The advisor's statements were in perfect harmony with Meri's proof, coming out to provide layer upon layer of proof that is indisputable, really, for much defense by Kody. "Mr. Brown, to what do you say about these documented instances?" he asked, leaning forward. Kody's voice faltered. I suppose at times I should have considered her point of view more carefully, but it was never done on purpose." The courtroom could feel the difference between words that were spoken under duress and those spoken with conviction. Kody was constantly hesitating and saying, pausing and using qualifiers to show his inability to maintain control over a situation no longer in his control. Meri had prepared her case well, was poised, and had proof, thus placing him on the defense, in which the emotional toll was plain to see, of being confronted so publicly. In fact, the more Kody tried to regain authority during the session, the more he extended the growing disparity between his projected image and the reality presented in court. Every evasive answer, every defensive statement reinforced the impression that Meri's claims were valid, and his control of family decisions had often gone unquestioned for too long. Robyn, still overcome with emotion, had leaned forward in her seat, dabbing her tears with a tissue. She was whispering to herself, "Finally, the truth is coming out." Supporters in the gallery took her cue, looking both shocked and vindicated by the revelations unfolding before them. As the session ended, it was crystal clear Kody had fumbled over how to reply effectively. His defenses were fragmented, incoherent, and insufficient against Meri's presentation. The courtroom atmosphere had completely flipped. Where confidence had once served as armor, now uncertainty, frustration, and exposure lay. The session's closing gavel freed whispers and murmurs around the courtroom. Spectators discussed power dynamics that shifted in real time. Analysts considered what it might mean in terms of Kody's faltering defense, and family members looked at each other in surprise, concern, and an apparent admiration for Meri's bravery. Reporters out of the courtroom hustled to capture the reactions, while social media erupted in commentary. Video clips of Kody's stammering and Meri's measured testimony were shared and dissected live. For the public, this wasn't just about family squabble. It was a melodramatic, real-life playing out of accountability, courage, and shifting dynamics within that well-known family. Kody walked out of the courtroom in silence, almost subdued. For the first time, his calm composure compromised. He knew the first crack in his authority had been exposed and that today's session would have ramifications far beyond this courtroom. Meri, on the other hand, walked out with her head held high, calm confidence a testament to the strength she had shown throughout the session. This third session of high-stakes family drama had delivered on everything the viewer could hope for: tension, emotional intensity, and a clear shift in power. Kody's fumbling for a decent response underlined how strong and prepared Meri was, and it set the stage for the stunning verdict that everyone knew was looming. The courtroom was electric with tension as the final seconds of the trial drew near. After hours and hours of testimony, evidence, and shouting match-like exchanges between counsels, the final moment every single person in the courtroom had been waiting for had finally arrived. The final word from the judge herself, the verdict. The courtroom appeared to be shining, and every heartbeat reverberated through it as if it were a drumbeat, marking the moments before the final moment, when the case could be shaped entirely. Meri Brown sat calmly in the room, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was a tranquil yet earnest mixture, like a coiled spring that was ready to burst forth. Meri had given testimony like a pro, with no room left for doubt or denial. She had countered each and every defense that Kody had put forth, and now waited to hear from the judge. But Kody looked nervous. The previous sessions had obviously taken their toll on him. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched, and his hands nervously flipped through his papers. For the first time in years, the impenetrable confidence of Kody Brown wavered when faced with the reality of his own culpability. All watching in the courtroom could feel his nervousness, and the room was charged with electricity. The judge touched his robe and leaned on the bench. He cleared his throat, and the sound of it summoned absolute silence. After carefully examining the evidence, the testimony, and the arguments made during the trial of this matter, he started firmly and rhythmically, "This court is ready to give a verdict." The words caused a stir in the courtroom. People naturally leaned in as reporters held pens and cameras at the ready. Starting to tremble slightly, as she held a tissue in her hands, Robyn Brown's eyes focused on the bench. The intensity of emotions present in the courtroom was almost intolerable. Meri's attorney gave her an encouraging look, and she nodded slightly, mentally preparing herself for what could be the culmination of years of hard work. Kody fought to pull himself together, but the anxiety was clearly etched on his face. After thorough consideration of all evidence that had been presented, including communications in writing, voice recordings, and testimonies by witnesses, the court holds in favor of Meri Brown. Charges against her are dismissed, and the duty in question shall be revised based on the evidence brought before the court at this sitting. The judge paused, choosing the next word carefully. The courtroom burst into shocked gasps for breath. Cameras snapped, while murmurs of shock swirled through the jury box seats. Whispers of shock passed through the crowd, while gasps of shock hung in the air. Guilty was not only an unexpected verdict, but an absolute one, as Meri Brown had not only argued her case, but won it. Robyn Brown's reaction was instantaneous. She put her hands out in front of her face, as tears streamed from her eyes. This is relief, validation, and shock all at once. This woman, who had observed others' dynamics in their families for so long, was now witnessing justice in her own life. "It's true. It's finally true," she whispered. Meri, too, was steadfast in her expression, although a faint light of emotion appeared in her eyes. Of course Meri had worked towards this victory, but the reality of it was now physically expressed on her face as relief and acknowledgement. For so long, Meri had been disempowered, dispossessed, disrecognized, but now her reality had been formally acknowledged by the court. Kody, on the other hand, was in shock. His expression was one of disbelief and frustration. The words "in favor of Meri Brown" hung in the air with the weight of reality that for the first time was before Kody in the form of uncontestable evidence of what he himself had done wrong. His typical tools of deception, charm, persuasion, manipulation through narrative, had no use in the face of incontrovertible evidence. The judge paused, allowing the gravity of the decision to sink in. Then, addressing both sides, the judge said, "This court wishes to make it clear that honesty, fairness, and accountability always play vital roles in cases involving families. Brown has shown incredible strength and tenacity in her pursuit and representation of her own case, and it is clear that this justice must take her voice and her contributions into account." The murmurs begin through the courtroom. The verdict was more than a win for Meri. It was a statement to the family, to the world, that truth, preparation, and strength could triumph against the long-time rule and repression. In recognition of the television audience at home, this is a cinematic experience, the kind of payoff one expects in a family court tale. Meanwhile, in the audience, the mood was electric. Cameras flashed as media members surrounded Meri to capture her reaction to the verdict. Social media erupted with comments and memes lauding Meri's courage. Videos of the verdict reading, Meri's calm and composed expression, contrasted with the breakdown of her sister Robyn, started spreading like wildfire just minutes after the verdict was read. Taking a deep breath, Meri began speaking to the media. "This trial is not about me," she stated boldly. "It's about standing up when it comes to what is right in support of those who have been silenced and shut down. My hope is that it inspires others to stand and claim their truths," she continued. Her words were very moving and summed up the whole point as to why it had grabbed the attention of so many viewers. Kody, on the other hand, was seen leaving the courtroom without saying a word to reporters when asked for his comments on the verdict. This was unusual for a media-cunning Kody, as if the emotional impact of the trial was affecting him as a consequence of the verdict going against his leadership and representing the bitter family dynamics that had been prevalent for years. Within the family, there was a mixed reaction. Some members remained relieved, realizing the importance of the acknowledgement of Meri's allegations by the court. There were those who remained torn, hesitating between their loyalty to Kody and the truth that was apparent in the courtroom. Robyn's reaction was a manifestation of the human element involved in the dispute over the legality of the situation. The case was also significant to viewers as a lesson and a story of empowerment and resilience. It was a story in which manipulation and control through intimidation and cleverness were overthrown through courage and preparedness. As a case of empowerment and a story of triumph over manipulation and control through intimidation and cleverness, it was a lesson on accountability. The courtroom emptied, and the press and onlookers discussed the events that took place in a whispery murmur, as they relived the moment of the testimony and the words that came from the judge's lips. Debate on social media raged on as fans analyzed all that happened at the trial: body language, proof, and reactions. Memes of the tears of the crying Robyn went viral alongside the composed and confidently serious Meri. The court's decision also made the Brown family realize their own dynamics. The structures of hierarchy that had been in place in their family for a long time, ways of decision-making, and individual relationships were now set to be re-evaluated in the context of the court's recognition of Meri's experiences and efforts. This is something that marked a particular moment in time, but will have a long-lasting effect in years to come. To Meri, the win was very personal. It was the culmination of all her hard work, her strength, and her willingness to fight back against control and oppression. Her painstaking preparation, her composed demeanor, and her steadfast determination to seek the truth had brought her to this defining victory. It not only accepted her claims, but it vindicated her whole experience. As she left the courtroom, fans rallied around her, giving her hugs, congratulations, and greater acclaim. The media coverage was close behind, trying to glean her quotes that would satisfy their audience for the scoop. "Today is a day of justice," Meri kept saying in front of the media. "Today is a day of standing up, of speaking out, of making sure that truth triumphs." At the same time, Kody was left with the difficult work of coming to terms with the verdict. It was witness to a rare vulnerability and failure in the courtroom, and the world was about to see the less familiar face of Kody Brown, a man forced to confront responsibility and unable to shift the blame elsewhere. It is no less than correct to state that the effects of this hearing went far beyond the verdict. The words of the judge, the ambiance of the courtroom, and the reactions of Meri and Kody built a crescendo that could rival that found in a scripted drama series episode. The tension and the implications involved in the scene resulted in a session that would be difficult to ignore for all who were present, as well as the millions who were watching at home. But as the dust began to settle, it became apparent that one person in particular had come out with their head held high: Meri Brown. The shocking verdict hadn't just blown the lid off a number of truths that had been kept hidden for far too long. It had also created a power imbalance within the Brown family dynamic that Kody simply couldn't deal with, while Robyn's meltdown and Meri's stoic calm made for one of the most memorable courtroom scenes ever shot, even as the court battle may have been set to continue in different ways. The implications of what had transpired in this courtroom had already left its indelible stamp. It confirmed the resilience of a lifetime of courage and effort, as it indicated the power of truth to supplant entrenched patterns of domination, with only a clarity and conviction in its assertion. In one way or the other, it was a victory for Meri, a reckoning for the Brown family, and a story to be remembered and retold in seasons to come for all who watched. The gavel had fallen, the verdict had been spoken, and the courtroom was slowly dispersing, but the tension, the emotion, the shock of it all had left its impression, like the aftermath of a storm that had moved through but left its impression upon the land. For Meri Brown, this trial verdict represented far more than a legal victory. It was a crossroads of a lifetime, a triumphant milestone of her having been quieted, overlooked, and dismissed for so long a period of her life. But before they could enter the courthouse, a throng of reporters and camera crews had assembled outside, all vying for a shot of this historic moment. Cameras clicked away in a mad whirl of focused on Meri, Kody, and the rest of the Brown clan. Microphones pushed forward eagerly, shouting questions in turn. Meri, how does it feel to win? Kody, what's your reaction to the verdict? Robyn, what's it like seeing this result? Meri paused for a moment before speaking to the assembly. This verdict is not only for me, she began, her voice steady and powerful. It is for anyone who has had a voice silenced, dismissed, and ignored. To speak one's truth is never an easy act, but is one that must be done. Justice is not simply about a legal ruling. It is about acknowledging a truth of a marginalized voice, and that has been done today. Her words touched the hearts of many people, including her fans but even others who followed the trial online. Social media was already abuzz with the response. Fans were commending her courage and reposting videos of her during the trial, her calm demeanor, and her strong stand. Hashtags indicating her victory trended on the social media sites within hours of the trial, and people discussed all that happened in the courtroom drama. Kody, on the other hand, emerged from the court with a silence that was almost palpable. For the first time, he was faced with the reality of accountability, and the import of the judgment was apparent in every step he took. People rallied around him, but he was tight-lipped with answers, content instead to grapple with the repercussions of the judgment in private. One is sure he was grappling with the evidence, the witness testimony, and the import of the judgment. "It's like it never ended," said Robyn Brown, her eyes streaming with tears. "It's like it's still happening." Her reaction was raw and very memorable. She was still crying as she hugged Meri very tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Finally, the truth has finally come out. This breakdown was long overdue, and it is evident that it took a lot for her to see Meri emerge victorious. The remaining members of the Brown family demonstrated a blend of emotions. There were those who looked relieved, realizing the importance of the acknowledgement of the situation faced by Meri, shown by the court. Others were torn apart between their loyalty to Kody and the facts shown in court. Muffled discussions broke out as members questioned the meaning of the judgment. There was also a burning truth that the dynamics of the family had been permanently changed. Cameras trailing Meri and her fans showed fans hugging Meri, congratulating her, and thanking her for her strength. Many news reporters struggled to keep up with the emotional reactions of fans as social media blew up with comments from fans across the world. Videos of Robyn's incredible emotional breakdowns went viral, while Meri's calm composure left fans inspired by her strength and resilience at a time when many women felt very much the same as Meri did, but without her composure. Experts joined the fray quickly. While some praised the hard work and courage shown by Meri during the proceedings, others analyzed the effect created by the helplessness of Kody, whose defense faltered, thus proving the strength of Meri's defense as well. Online portals were swarmed with interactions, comments, and praises as this courtroom saga became the talk of the town. The impact of the verdict was not only restricted to the legal world, but was of great importance to the family as a whole. The long-established hierarchical system and decision-making process would need a fresh analysis. Meri's victory not only brought joy to her, but was a milestone for the family structure as a whole, because the decisions which were taken unquestionably would now come under the scanner of critical analysis, and the family dynamics would change significantly. Meri realized the implications of her case too. In some of the post-trial interviews she gave, she expressed the need to stand up for oneself and ensure that one has their voice heard. "This isn't just about one family or one dispute," she stated. "It's about recognizing the value of honesty, integrity, and fairness in every relationship. I hope my journey encourages others to stand up for themselves and their truths, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem." The public response was equally passionate. Meri's supporters appreciated her grit and courage, and the rest of Kody's critics questioned the longevity of the dynamics in the family. Memes, videos, and comments trended heavily as a result, making it one of the most popular family drama stories of the year. For most watching and following the story, Meri's win was a victory in a symbolic sense, of courage against intimidation and preparation against unchecked power. Within the family, the effects would manifest in more direct and interpersonal terms. Kody was forced to come to terms with his behavior and its revelation to public view. Beliefs about his position and choice-making that over the years could not easily or simply be rejected would suddenly find themselves called into question. Patterns of relationships that existed through deference or control would find themselves subject to reappraisal. Robyn's reaction brought to the forefront the humanity that had resulted from this situation. Robyn had been observing this family dynamic all along and had been witness to the control issues and silencing that had been occurring. Witnessing the court's confirmation of Meri's truth not only confirmed Meri's experience, but also reinforced Robyn's beliefs all along. The tears, the hugs, and the feelings of relief brought an end to all the unspoken realities that had been occurring. On the other hand, Kody's humble exit from the courtroom spoke volumes. The normally commanding patriarch now had to deal with the prying eyes of the media as well as his own introspection. The courtroom experience had revealed his weaknesses and even his own vulnerabilities, in addition to his authoritarian style in his personal and family life. The trial would prove to be an experience of reckoning in his life. The larger implications were not restricted to the family circle. For the audience, for the supporters, Meri's success became a case study in resilience, in preparation, and in courage. This became a demonstration of the impact of being steadfast when faced with control, of being able to present information clearly when faced with data, and of being able to perform when it mattered most. As the courthouse began emptying, the paparazzi were there to capture all the moments that unfolded. Interviews, comments, and fan reactions were all over the headlines and social media sites. It appeared that while Meri's calm demeanor stood out starkly with Kody's low-key attitude, this gave way to storytelling that resonated with all kinds of audiences everywhere. The Brown family was facing a new reality when the cameras weren't around anymore. The conversations that could have been kept at bay or bypassed were staring them right in the face. All these would mean a different dynamic between the members and a fresh look at the relationships between them, as they struggled with the emotional impact even after the cameras shifted focus elsewhere. For Meri, it was the turning point in the legal struggle, but also in her own life. The day represented triumph over fear, conflict, and the media spotlight. It symbolized her victory over patterns of behavior she could neither ignore nor escape. The courtroom did not merely validate her rights. It validated her entire experience. This was an affirmation of her voice and her agency in her own life. As the dust settled and the courtroom emptied, one thing remained obvious. A new era had opened for the Brown family saga. The days ahead were sure to be full of emotional turmoil and drama. Yet for Meri, Robyn, and all those who stood with justice, this verdict offered hope and validation, not only for themselves, but also for all who had stood with justice. And yet, while the ending was certainly not in sight yet, the events of this season had already carved their mark on the history of family drama. Meri Brown did not only succeed in winning her legal struggle. She changed the dynamics of the family in which she belonged, as well as inspired millions of women in the world with the example of standing up for their rights.